This week on Quadriga, Turkish elections. Erdogan forever? Voters in Turkey will go to the polls on Sunday to take part in the country's first direct presidential election. Few people dispute that Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan will win. During his 10 years as Prime Minister, Turkey's economy has grown rapidly, and initially he introduced political reforms. His Islamic-oriented policies also increased Erdogan's popularity with many Turkish people, but there have been allegations of corruption during his terms in office. And he has been criticised for repressing voices in society that oppose him, such as last year, the mass protests in Gezi Park in Istanbul. If elected president, will Erdogan continue to expand the powers of his office and take Turkey in the direction of authoritarianism? Or are Erdogan's critics exaggerating that danger? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Quadriga. The Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is already the longest-serving Prime Minister in the history of the country, and he's hoping that the nation's voters will give him another term, at least for another 5 years. Some people deem this to be the most important Turkish election in history. What's at stake for Turkey? That's what we're going to talk about on today's show, and for that, I am joined by three experts, all who've been following this election campaign very closely. Welcome to Yasemin Ergin, who is a German-Turkish journalist who has reported frequently from Turkey. She is one of the editors of Zenit, a German magazine on the Islamic world, and is also contributing frequently to NDR television and the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Baha Güngör is a seasoned journalist who has been heading the Turkish program here at Deutsche Welle for more than 15 years. Previously, he served as the Turkey correspondent for various news organizations, such as the German press agency. And Lüders is an author and political advisor with extensive experience in Turkey and the Middle East, including as correspondent for the German newspaper Die Zeit. He has published widely on Turkey's role in the world. Welcome to this edition of Quadriga. A lot to talk about in the time span of 45 minutes, Baha Güngör. This is the very first time that the Turkish voters will get to decide who the next Turkish president will be. This is the first direct presidential election. And some people deem this even to be the most important election in the history of Turkey. Would you agree?
I would agree. It's the first time that the parliament is not asked anything. The parliament is not playing a role, and that's why we also are very, very looking forward to this election. We know what's going on with Turkey in the next decades. Will we have a presidential system? Will we have somehow a semi-parliamentarian system? This is all decided on Sunday, or if not on this Sunday, in 2 weeks in the second round.
Indeed, and of course one of the contenders, if not the main contender, is Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's been in power in Turkey since 2003. He won 3 consecutive terms as Prime Minister. He can't run again as Prime Minister, and ironically not because the Turkish constitution forbids him from doing so, but the party charter.
Yeah. Well, he made it. He didn't have to, but he didn't think about winning 3 times. So he did it, but he can't go back anymore. And now he is trying to be a prime minister and a president. So he will be a president, perhaps like in France. He wants to be, or like one in USA. But we have to wait and see whether the parliament is playing a role when he decides things, and the parliament has to approve it.
And Yasemin Ergin, as was already alluded by Baha Güngör, indeed Erdogan made no qualms about it. He doesn't make a secret of the fact that he wants to turn Turkey into a US-style presidency, that he wants to change the constitution to become a hands-on president, not a ceremonial one up until now. What do you think? What would an Erdogan presidency mean for Turkey?
Well, I mean, worst case scenario, and many people already call him a dictator. Worst case scenario, there will be a president who makes all the decisions. I mean, as you said, he doesn't make a secret out of it that he thinks a US-style presidential system would be ideal for Turkey. He said many times that he has no intentions of being, as he called it, a sitting president, a president who just sits around and fulfills ceremonial tasks, but that he wants to lead this country into this bright future that, you know, he's always talking about. And he has all these major projects going on, you know, the huge airport, the second Bosporus, all these things. And it's not a secret that Erdogan's dream is to lead Turkey into this future, to still lead Turkey in, if I'm not mistaken, in 2023, you know,
that's correct,
for the anniversary. And it's not unlikely that once he's elected president, he will still try and remain a hold on his party, that he will try and orchestrate the election of a prime minister who he can direct, not unsimilar to the way Putin did it in Russia. And that he will make all the decisions. And he has already, during his prime ministry, surrounded himself with yes-sayers, with people who do nothing much but, you know, cheer him and agree with everything that he has to say.
And indeed, some people have said he's out to, you know, if you will, adopt the Putin-Medvedev scenario to Turkey, whereas he is going to switch offices and places with Abdullah Gül, the current president. But Abdullah Gül said he wants no part of it.
Well, it's very... no one really knows what Gül's plans are. Gül has been an interesting character, especially like in this past year, because of course he has never openly opposed himself to Erdogan. He hasn't vetoed any laws. He has signed everything that he had to sign. But he did also express criticism. I mean, famously when Twitter was banned in Turkey shortly before the last communal elections, when Twitter was already banned, Gül was one of the many Turks who, you know, found a way to go on Twitter anyway and said this is not a great idea. And he has also called for a more diplomatic approach to the Gezi protesters. So there was some quiet opposition, but no one really knows. I mean, it's very unlikely that Erdogan will give him an important role.
So we don't know about the political future of Abdullah Gül. What we do know is Recep Tayyip Erdogan wants to become the next president of Turkey. And as it has already been said, at least until the year 2023, when the Turkish Republic will turn 100 years old. How realistic is the scenario, Michael Lüders?
Well, I mean, so far there appears to be no political power that is willing or able to really get a hold on him. So, you know, he stands a good chance of becoming the second Ataturk in modern Turkish history, the second most important person who shapes Turkey's direction. I think in order to understand his, you know, tremendous success, it is necessary to look at the economy of Turkey, which, since he took power 12 years ago, has only known one direction, which is the upward one. And the Turkish economy is so strong now. I mean, when you compare it to 12 years ago, Turkey was almost bankrupt and the country was close to a collapse, and now it's booming. And Erdogan, the Turkish economy, is very much profiting also on geopolitical turmoil. Many Iranians in the past, many rich Gulf Arabs, and now rich Russians, the oligarchs, they pull off their money from Western European banks and deposit at least parts of their money in Turkey. So Turkish banks, they barely know where to put all this money, and the Turkish economy is really profiting from this. And it's not only that the usual suspects benefit from it, but also the broad population, so to speak, profits from this development. There is a good chance on the job market. People feel that they are living a better life than 10 or 15 years ago, and they are very grateful to Erdogan, to whom they, you know, address their thanks and their gratitude. And as long as the economy takes this upward turn, I think he has no reason to fear his opponents. although they are strong, but they are mainly opponents from the middle class in the larger cities, mainly in Istanbul, but not so much the plain people, if I may say so, in the countryside, in the eastern parts of the country. They love their Erdogan, although he is known to be corrupt, but nevertheless, many of those who support him, they say, well, the other ones who were in office before him, they were also corrupt. Now it's his turn, but, you know, we don't mind because we also lead a better life.
They also lead a better life, says Michael Lüders. And Baha Güngör, it is flabbergasting sometimes, isn't it? Despite the Gezi protest, despite the reaction on the part of the Erdogan government to these protests, despite corruption allegations, despite the, by all accounts, bad handling on the part of the government of the Soma tragedy, he still enjoys at least 50% of approval rate in Turkey. Is the economy the only factor here?
Not only only factor, because Erdogan gave to the people a feeling, a very new feeling, saying he focused the identification of the nation on religion and on power. And now the Turks say, well, why should we be the last one in the international politics in the West if we can be the first one or the leading one of the leading ones in the East or in the Middle East? So he gave to the people the strong feeling, we are really important in the world, we are really important in the region. So this is the feeling that people said, okay, then I give my vote for him. I vote for him instead of voting for somebody who I don't know. And this is the same which we'll see on Sunday. The people vote for him, of course, because they don't want the experiments anymore.
And the economy, once again, I want to touch upon this. Some people say, yes, of course, Turkey has made great strides when it comes to the economy, but the boom is somewhat fragile. They say it's really based on a lot of heavy borrowing, on financial investments from abroad that is fleeting and fickle at best. They say great trade deficit that Turkey carries bears a great financial risk for the future.
Well, the people are living really on credits. You see, every Turk has 5, 6, 7 credit cards, and so they have to put from one credit card to the other to pay the debt on the other credit card. So this will sometime, this will explode or implode, and we will have a lot of problems in the Turkish economy because people won't be able to pay their debt anymore, and there's fears, of course, of a big economic crisis in Turkey.
Yasemin Ergin, even his critics, even his fiercest critics would admit that he's had some success, that he has curtailed the power of the military, which reigned arbitrarily for the past few decades in Turkey. They say he has granted more civil liberties to minorities in Turkey than any other of his predecessors. They say he has given Turkey international prestige and recognition. Would you also recognize these as success?
It's definitely one of the main reasons for his success and for his popularity among large parts of the population, because what he did is, I mean, one key to Erdogan's success story is his own background. He comes from this working class background. He grew up in this poor neighborhood of Istanbul. He worked Kasım Pasha, very famously, you know, a rough neighborhood. He grew up on the streets, selling, selling pastry on the streets to be able to afford his school books. And he's very proud of this background. He's very proud of being someone who worked his way up. And the people, the large majority of people in Turkey who have a similar background, they love him for that. And what he did during his leadership is that he gave power to these largely neglected middle classes in Turkey, because not too long ago, before his party came to power, the economic power in Turkey was in the hands of a small minority of these secular elites, of these urban elites. And Erdogan was the one who, I mean, people before him had started it, but he's the one taking all the credit. He's the one who's known to have given economical power, business opportunities, self-confidence to these large middle classes from all over Turkey. Now we have economical centers, we have boom towns in the middle of Turkey, like Kayseri and central Anatolia, cities that no one had really heard of before, and now those cities are economical hubs in Turkey. And so these people, these parts of the population, they love him for that, and they don't care about, you know, like a handful of protesters in Istanbul, or even about the corruption scandal, as Michael Lüders just said.
Michael Lüders, is this a case of the so-called white Turks versus black Turks? Is this not so much about religion, but really about class struggle, class warfare here?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you make there. Of course, I mean, Erdogan and his party, they use religion as a political means, but it is nonsense to claim that he would try to change Turkey into an Islamic state. I mean, he's using religion, that is for sure. And many of his voters who are conservative, they appreciate his, you know, inclinations towards religion. But Turkey is far away from becoming a Muslim state in the sense that Islam be the ideology of the country. But I think when it comes to identity, I mean, many Turks, they of course, they struggle with themselves. Whom do we belong to? Many Turks think they are Europeans, but the European Union gives them a hard time to accept the idea that Turkey is part of Europe. And I think at least within the political class, but also probably among many Turks in Turkey, there is a new impression saying that, okay, if the European Union doesn't want us, well, why should we care about the European Union? We go our own way. And this is a feeling that Erdogan, you know, transforms into policy making.
And to back up what you're saying, latest poll showed that only 44% of Turks are still in favor of EU membership. That's down from 75% only a decade ago. So that shows how drastically the perception of the EU has changed in Turkey.
Absolutely, and I think we in the West, in Western Europe, we make one big mistake. We tend to look upon the world from our Western European perspective only. We do not realize that there are new alliances shaping up. Now we have the confrontation with Russia. And Russia, of course, will look for new markets. The new market for Russia is China. There is Turkey, which is not very happy about the way it's being treated by the European Union. There is Iran that is about to re-enter the political realm. And of course, the Iranian economy is also looking for new markets. So I think in the medium run, we will see a new, let's say, economic hub centering around Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, the so-called BRICS state. And the Europeans, in the end, they might be looking quite sadly why they missed this golden opportunity to deal more closely with Turkey. And I think Erdogan here understands the political game. He knows that Turkey is in a relatively strong position, despite the fact that Erdogan himself has made many mistakes that cost Turkey dearly, mainly in dealing with the crisis in the Middle East, especially Syria.
Baha Güngör, let's get back to the election, and because Erdogan obviously is not the only candidate running for this office. He has two main opponents. Let's talk about them. Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu, he's the candidate of the two joint main opposition party, the MHP, the Nationalist Party, as well as the center-left CHP. And we have Selahattin Demirtas, who is a well-known Kurdish politician from the HDP. Let's talk about İhsanoğlu for a second. An interesting guy, 71 years old, diplomat. How do you assess his campaign so far?
Well, he's very sensible, he's very withholding, and he's not arguing and shouting and making noise like Erdogan. But still, he was a Secretary General of Islamic Conference Organization, so he has a lot of experience in the Islamic world, and he's well known in the Islamic world. And so I think that he should have a chance, at least in the second round, but not in the first round. On the other hand, Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu is, of course, losing this game against Erdogan, because Erdogan is very loud, very forward in his way of arguing, and İhsanoğlu is a really diplomat, and he's not the type of politician Turks would favor very much.
So then, if I understand you correctly, the Erdogan style of campaigning suits the Turkish public more than
they needed that, because in the past, in 60s, 70s, 80s, they had this kind of politics until the military coup d'etat in 1980, and then they had to calm down a little bit. And with Turgut Özal, they tried again to go back on this loud campaigning eras. But in the 90s, we had a war with PKK, and we had a lot of political turmoil in Turkey as well. And Erdogan is, of course, is telling to the people, it's very loud. And I have a lot of colleagues living in Istanbul, and they say, can you tell Erdogan, please, to go a little bit slower and, and turn down the noise. And the Turks need that, because the Turks need that since they know Erdogan will give them a new identity in the regional, at least in the region, as a regional power. And we must not forget, Putin is one of the, perhaps one of the examples for Erdogan. And Erdogan is also not very keen on the subject that he says, I want to go to the European Union. He says that, but he doesn't really want anymore.
Does Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu, does he stand a realistic chance to become president?
No, well, in second round he could challenge, but I don't think that he will have a realistic chance.
Yasemin Ergin, let's talk about Selahattin Demirtas. Very interesting, charismatic Kurdish politician. And some say the fact that he stands as a candidate already shows how far Turkey has come. Would you agree?
That is true. I mean, he's an interesting character. He's very young, 41 years old. He's very eloquent, very smart, very intellectual. He's a former human rights lawyer. So not only Kurds like him, but there are many liberal Turkish people who also like him. And I have spoken to many people in Turkey and with Turks outside of Turkey who say he would be their popular candidate, but he doesn't have a chance because he's too closely associated with the Kurdish issue. He's too closely associated with the PKK. He's one of the lawyers who has been in touch with the PKK leader Öcalan. So it's very unlikely that he will get more than, I don't know, 10% maybe, the Kurdish votes, if at all. But it's true, in a way it is already an accomplishment that a Kurdish politician with close connections to the PKK leader and who hasn't really distanced himself from the PKK as much as Turks like it to be the case, that he's one of the 3 presidential candidates, it's already a big deal.
And you already mentioned the Turks abroad, because they were eligible to vote this time around.
Yes.
2.7 million Turks, to be exact, abroad, living outside of Turkey, were eligible in this election to take part. Half of them in Germany, we should add. But now here comes the disappointing fact, depending on whom you ask. Only approximately about 5 to 7% voted. Why?
Yes. It has actually it has 2 reasons. And you're right, it was supposed to be a really big deal, especially for the Turks living in Germany, because, you know, they are in Germany, Turks consider the largest minority, and for the first time in history, they were allowed to participate in Turkish elections, and in such an important elections as this one. So you would have thought that participation would have been really big, but first of all, the whole procedure was really complicated, and that's what scared many people off. It was not easy. It wasn't. Yeah, it was complicated. First, they needed to make sure that they are registered as voters. If they are not, they had to, you know, apply to be registered into the voters list. Then they had to get appointments online for one of the election dates. So
many bureaucratic hurdles.
Many bureaucratic hurdles, and especially for older Turkish citizens living in Germany, it was just too much. And that there were only 7 cities in Germany where elections were taking place. So many of these voters would have had to travel very far. So, and then also it's summertime, it's holiday time. Many Turks have actually voted on vacation in Turkey. So the actual numbers will show once all the votes get counted. But yeah, it was quite a disappointment.
So clearly, Michael Lüders, the selection and the votes from abroad will not make a significant impact that much. Some people even say this is good news. This is good news, that the fact that a Turkish politician cannot come to Germany and, if you will, campaign and utilize the Turks living abroad, particularly in Germany, for their own cause. Would you agree?
Yes, I think so too. I mean, Erdogan had hoped for more. He was really hoping that German Turks, for instance, they would vote for him and so on and so forth. But so far, the result, as we have just heard, are very limited. I think the very fact that quite a few Turks still voted for these elections in Turkey is simply a sign of a transformation, if you wish. I mean, Germany, for a very long period of time, until the early or mid-90s, let's say, was not very sure whether the notorious guest workers were really about to stay or whether they would go back to Turkey. But then politicians understood that, you know, there's a new generation, and this new generation will not return to Turkey. And now we talk about migrants, which is very interesting as a word. We are not using the term immigrants, rather we talk about migrants, implying that, well, they might continue to migrate to another area, which is of course nonsense. But Germany has had quite a few difficulties to accept the idea that we are a country of immigration. Especially conservatives don't like the idea. They still like to think about, you know, ethnicity as being the common denominator of all Germans, which is not the case. Germany is one of the most popular countries for immigrants, but many politicians refuse to accept this fact. So the reason why we have so many Turks still voting for a Turkish president is simply their quest of identity, if you wish. I think 10 years from now, you know, fewer and fewer German Turks will be interested in Turkish elections. They will rather focus on German elections. So this is really a transitional phenomena as I see it.
Baha Güngör, you're a very experienced journalist, and I cannot pass up this opportunity asking you about how this election was covered by Turkish journalists and media outlets, and how it's still covered. A lot of people are saying this is not you know, partial media campaign that is being executed in Turkey. Erdogan gets a lot more airtime than his two opponents. Would you say that the media has not been able to cover this election free and fairly?
No, not at all. The media failed to be really the voice of the population. And in TRT, the state television, they make lists, you see, each day, about 500 minutes for Erdogan, about 30 minutes for Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu, about 9 minutes for Demirtas. This is just about the quota for this reporting. Now, we have in Turkey also a censorship. We have also in Turkey a lot of problems with the freedom of to express the opinion. We have more journalists in prison than in Iran and in China. So all this, of course, told together and took together. If you take all this together, then you have the problem that the people also fear to really write and comment on Erdogan's failures.
So he's controlling the media? Is that what you're saying?
Completely. Completely, because the media is not like in Germany. Media is not independent. It's just a part of a big tycoon, big company. So these companies need, of course, the very warm contact to the government because they want to develop their success, and that's why media is not free in Turkey at all.
And Yasemin Ergin, the media is not the only thing people are saying that Erdogan is controlling. He's also very much has a firm grip on the judiciary system of Turkey, appointing judges, appointing police, replacing them at his own will. Of course, the Gülen movement, which is very much involved and personally invested in the police and judges. Do you think that once he gets elected as president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, with the reign and the firm grip that he already has on the country, it's going to get even worse?
I think so. I mean, that's what many people are worried about because, I mean, we discussed this earlier. He has no intentions in being, you know, a laid-back president, a president who just represents, but he wants to push, I mean, his projects, his initiatives, this increasing conservatism in Turkish society. It's very likely that he will want to push all these, you know, his political stance even further, that he will want to use the power that he has to push forward to this idea of Turkey that
so more authoritarianism in Turkey?
Yes, and also more conservatism, I would say.
Michael Lüders, would you agree that Turkey is heading that way, heading down this path, if and when Erdogan is elected?
At least I see no political force that would be really able or willing to stop him. I mean, he is really an absolute monarch in a sense, and he is transforming the political system of Turkey into a presidential system. And this is, of course, a new experience for Turkey, because so far being a president in Turkey was simply a ceremonial function. But now the future president, Erdogan, in other words, he will be the real strongman. And as we have just heard, businessmen, for instance, or people who want to go for a career, they will be very careful in challenging his hold and grip on power. So I think Erdogan is heading for some good years to come, as long as the economy continues to flourish. Should this not be the case any longer, then he will face hardship.
Some people are still scratching their heads, wondering what happened in Turkey. Because as I said, you know, he started out very strongly. He started out as a political reformer, as somebody who's going to bring more democracy to Turkey, who granted more rights to minorities than any of his predecessors, at least during his first 2 terms. What went wrong?
I think this is part of the political system in Turkey. I mean, there is the strong reference to someone who is the strong man. When you look at the party system in Turkey, all parties, they are organized around one leading figure, the Baba at the top, and it's the Baba who is really telling his party and the population, his voters, which way to take and what direction should be followed. And this is also what Erdogan is practicing, as did all his predecessors. And this system doesn't work any longer, in my view. I mean, Turkey is a very dynamic society. There is so much going on. I mean, Turkey has completely changed over the past 20, 30 years. And still, the political system is very much left in the 1950s, 1960s. A strong authoritarian figure at the top with a certain charisma, and he is trying, you know, to head the right way. And you can also, when you look at the body language of Erdogan, especially his way of talking, you talked about that before, you always think, I mean, I don't understand Turkish, but when I hear him talking, I always think he is making a declaration of war. And it's a very emotional, a very radical soundtrack, so to speak. It's not a smooth way of trying to convince others. It's rather saying, it's me or it's you, the enemy, so you better go for me. This is the message he's conveying, and it's working pretty well.
And indeed, the Turkish society has become very polarized, a lot of black and white thinking. Either you are with Erdogan or you're against Erdogan. That cannot be a healthy development, yeah?
It's not healthy at all. I mean, in Turkey, we had always a problem that the Turks thought somebody can be for me or against me, but there's nothing in between. That is since I'm born in the 50s, so it is like that. And as Michael Lüders said, we had always strong babas as father figures, since Adnan Menderes in the 50s, then Demirel in the 60s and 70s, Ecevit, Turgut Özal, and we had in between, we had of course this military coup d'etats where we had generals as the leading figures in the country. And now we have Erdogan, and somehow it doesn't work. The democracy within the parties don't work at all. And because it's not working, you don't have the development in direction democracy. And you have there are no journalists who can really be courageous enough and say, stop that.
Can we even talk of 2 Turkeys here? Can we talk of a deeply divided nations? Yes. The so-called Black Turks, who feel very closely emotionally associated with Erdogan, and then, if you will, for lack of a better term, the White Turks, who want perhaps a more liberal society. Would that be an accurate description, Yasemin Ergin?
I'm not a big fan of this black and white division, because the Turkish society is very, as I'm sure you know, very diverse, very pluralistic. So I don't think we can speak about white Turks and black Turks. The line is not that clear, if it ever was. What is definitely true is that Turkey has always been a very polarized society, and this polarization has become much stronger under Erdogan, and especially after the Gezi protests of last year, because before that you had of course people who supported him, people who were strongly opposed to him, but then there was also this large middle class who maybe, the urban middle classes who maybe weren't crazy about him, but who also wouldn't have gone out of their way to oppose him. But the Gezi protests has actually made this polarization much stronger, in the sense that people who are against him are now really against him. They now really want things to change. They are really struggling for things to change. And they have learned, which is one of the most positive outcomes of these protests, that they can stand up for, for their views. But at the same time, because of the way Erdogan dealt with these protests and because of the way he established these protesters as these troublemakers, these criminals, terrorists, looters, he has also managed his supporters to, develop this disdain, this hostility almost towards those people who protested against him. So, yeah, and in that sense, you're right.
And Gezi, of course, Gezi, a turning point, undoubtedly, as Yasemin Ergin said correctly, certainly a turning point within Turkey, but also a turning point for how Turkey has been perceived abroad. Turkey and Erdogan in particular had great ambitions about placing Turkey as a regional power. Let's see of how that played out.
By cultivating relations with major powers, Erdogan has pledged to make Turkey one of the world's leading countries within a decade. Erdogan has also changed his foreign policy focus from the West to the East and to the Middle East in particular. Iran and Russia are two of the neighbouring states that Ankara has tried to develop relations with. Relations with Israel were badly damaged after Israeli commandos stormed a ship that was attempting to break the blockade of Gaza in 2010. 8 Turkish citizens on board the ship were killed in the operation. Erdogan had a close relationship with Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. He warned Assad to use restraint against his opposition, but that fell on deaf ears and showed Erdogan might not have as much influence over his neighbours as he thinks.
Michael Lüders, Recep Tayyip Erdogan certainly had high ambitions of placing Turkey as one of the regional players. The famous zero problem strategy by Ahmet Davutoğlu, his foreign minister, was certainly the leading guidelines for a few years. That all crumbled, hasn't it?
Yes, definitely. I think the main reason really was that the foreign policy of Turkey was too ambitious. During the Arab Revolution, many Turkish politicians thought that Turkey would be the big winner of the new developments because the success of the AK party seemed to be a role model for Islamists in the Arab world. But as we know, the situation in the Arab world is very complex, very difficult. Countries are falling apart, there's anarchy, there's civil war, and for this reason it didn't really work out. And Erdogan made one big mistake. This was maybe the central mistake in dealing with the Arab world. Not only him, the Western countries in general committed the same error. They thought, it would be very easy to topple Bashar al-Assad in Syria. It would just be a matter of a couple of months' time, as happened in Libya, and then there would be a new Syrian regime that would be pro-Western and pro-Turkish. As we know, things have gone into a different direction. It was a big mistake for Turkey to cut all contacts with Bashar al-Assad from the beginning on, because now Turkey has more than 1 million Syrian refugees on its territory. These refugees are definitely, at least most of them, are going to stay in Turkey. And it's very difficult and it's very dangerous, to see the development along the borders of Turkey, both in Syria and in Iraq. Turkey now has a new neighbor, the Islamic State, which is one of the most fundamentalist, most radical, most brutal Islamist gangs you can imagine. And they control a huge territory in Syria and Iraq. And they are, right along the Turkish border. They are very strong. There have been quite a few dealings and wheelings going on between the Turkish government and the Islamic State, which was also not a good idea. So we see really here the crumbles of a diplomacy that has failed. And obviously, as we have heard from secret tapes that were recorded, there was even the idea of provoking a pseudo-Islamist attack on Turkish territory in order to get NATO involved to defend Turkey. It didn't work out. But in this context, we have to say that Erdogan, especially him, made a big mistake in his misunderstanding of what's going on in Syria, and Turkey is going to pay quite a high price in the next years to come.
So Turkey certainly went from zero problems, the obtained goal of zero problems, to many problems.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's for certain. They supported the Muslim Brotherhood. We know how that ended. Now they're on bad terms with the Egyptian government. Certainly the Turkish-Israeli relationship has also probably at an all-time worse, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Very bad relations. Yeah, I mean, Erdogan is, of course, very much supporting the Hamas movement and also the Muslim Brothers. It's very correct to mention them. There were good relations between the Muslim Brothers in Egypt and Turkey, but of course after the coup d'etat in Egypt and the outlawing of the Muslim Brotherhood by the new Egyptian government, the relations have turned sour, and Erdogan is isolated in that sense, but still his very strong support for the Palestinians, that goes very well, not only with large parts of Turkey's public opinion, but also within the Arab world. So still Erdogan has a good chance to reconnect with the audience in the Arab world. Also, of course, this isolates him in Europe, where the general sentiment and also the political sentiment are more pro-Israel.
Baha Güngör, certainly many problems for Erdogan to tackle in the foreign policy arena, many problems to tackle on the domestic front. Since, unfortunately, we're running out of time, let's get back to the election and the repercussions and ramifications of this election. Fast forward a few days from now, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is the new president of Turkey. What will happen?
Well, he will first of all, of course, try to say, I am the only one, and then he will also tell the Europeans that they have to deal with him for a long time. And of course, the Europeans need a strong Turkey also on their side, because the European interests in the region is, of course, without Turkey is not possible to think about it. And so they need Turkey's help for the energy routes and all what we know about it. But the red carpet which the Europeans rolled out for Erdogan is now taken away again.
Yasemin Ergin, last words. Any chance that Erdogan will not become the next president?
Well, we can hope, but I don't see much chance. Maybe he will have to, wait for the second round, but the other candidates don't hold.
Are you optimistic about the future of the country?
I try to be.
Well, I think that wraps up a very insightful and interesting discussion on the upcoming presidential election in Turkey. I want to thank my guests for shedding some light on many of the intricate issues out there. I want to thank you out there for tuning in. And we at DW will, of course, continue to follow the story and keep you posted as it unfolds. Thank you out there for tuning in. Thank you for my guests, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.